Coming from a master in engineer's perspective, this would be a good addition for a quote to include in the essay. With the rise of home production or home mastering, how relevant do you think studios like this are?
That's a great question, actually. They're still very relevant, and it's also, I guess, that question as well is are we threatened by home producers and home people doing this on laptops? And the answer is yes. Essentially, that we are losing business, but in the same respect, anybody who comes to a place like this will warrant and will understand the sort of things that we do. And a lot of our clientele is sort of older generations and bigger bands and people that have been around for a few years, and they come to us because we still offer a service that very few people do. And people that are just on a laptop, I mean, even if you've got a degree in music, the amount I've learned from working with Simon and Simon's history and heritage is huge and massive, and just the ways of thinking about things and the ways of applying processing and the ways of just generally actually looking at the job is something that is so different than you're going to get from a £10 guy with a laptop.
Yeah, expertise is expertise in any field that you're amongst. Like, it's the difference between having a good bricklayer and a bad bricklayer.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you can have a shitty house.
Yeah, and yes, the gap between what I can achieve digitally and what I can achieve here, the gap isn't that massive. But the gap between some sort of anybody who's just working on a laptop or just working with plugins and doesn't really have that expertise is going to be quite substantial. So yeah, I still think there's the space for big studios, and I still think that they're warranted and they're worthwhile. But I also wouldn't knock what is possible digitally, because I think it's the difference between all of this gear and what's available now as plugins isn't as vast as it used to be.
And it's also like knowing what your tools do, right? Like you can say you can download Ozone and just use the AI and get a really shitty ass master, or you could actually look at these different plugins, learn the plugins, and do great masters. Like it's always about the sort of tools that you're using.
Like everything I say today, we're listening to the gear.
Yeah.
The gain, adding gain here with this is completely different to adding gain here.
Yeah.
And so knowing your tools, like completely knowing exactly how they all work, again makes for quite a big difference.
Like you could probably be listening to say, when someone's like commissions you to do like a master, you can probably listen to the piece of material that they've given you and already have an idea of the signal chain and what you'll possibly be using at these different stages, because like you know the ins and outs of the circuits and what the characteristics they lead.
Exactly. And equally, if you put me in a studio with loads of gear I didn't know, it would take me time, because I would sit there for the first hour just listening to the gear.
Or even just reading the manual. And then you're like, I haven't even used the gear yet.
Yeah. So. And that's the point really, is knowing your tools, knowing your job, and knowing what the client wants and expects, and tying all those things in together to make the final package, which should hopefully tick all those boxes.
Yeah. You ever working in the box and thinking, no, I need to take this into Simon's place because I need that bit of gear and I can't replicate that sound at home?
No. I've spent a lot of time going. So I use a lot of analog emulation plugins, and I'm especially fond of the Plugin Alliance ones because of their patented method of measuring. The tolerance modeling technology thing that they do, which is a combination of measuring electrical components and measuring the front to back input output stages. And so what that gives you is essentially a snapshot of an analog device, although it's not analog and it's not going to have the same kind of quirks. So for instance, what you run through that is not always going to give you the same effect. It's dependent on source material because it's electrons and it's all that jazz. Whereas the analog emulation plugins are going to give you the same sort of thing each time. But with that in mind, I kind of have my set of analog gear plugins, which I know as well as I do this gear.
like the warm LA kind of like.
Warm Audio are good for emulations.
Well, I've seen a
They
few.
did their own 1176, don't they?
Well, I've seen a few new ones have come out and a few new Teletronics and stuff like that, and a few EQs and bits and bobs.
I mean, so some of the ones that are my absolute staples, it's like EQ wise, is this one of my, and this is a Pultec style EQ, I believe, as well. No, not that. The NIF Audio Soma, and this kind of lives on my mix bus quite a lot of the time as well, and I use this for Dolby Atmos mastering quite a bit, and it just sounds great. I mean, let's just run it on a bit of dry audio.